Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is What Makes a Proposal a Winner? My name is David Gates and I'm the Director of Online Education here at GrantStation. Now, this past summer, GrantStation ran its biennial winning grant proposal competition, and the winning proposal was written by Mary Connor of Soccer Without Borders. And today we have Mary with us along with 4 of the competition's judges. And together they're going to discuss what made Mary's proposal so strong so you can incorporate these lessons into your proposals. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to one of those judges, which is GrantStation's president, Alice Ruhnke.
And thank you everyone for being here. We got a big crowd and I'm super excited to share this information with you about Mary's proposal and how it was indeed quite the winner. So like David said, every other year, GrantStation and the Grant Professionals Association sponsors a winning grant proposal competition. And so if you won a grant award in those previous 2 years, you can submit that proposal to us and we put it through a system of pre-screeners and then our final expert judges to pick out some of the best applications from the pile of applications. So this year we had 186 applicants who were then pre-screened by 36 different individuals who put them through a decision-making matrix and that sort of thing. And the different ones kind of moved up the pile. And then our expert external judges judged the final ones and selected the winners. So you can see on this slide here, we had Cindy Adams, who's the founder of GrantStation. And I'm imagining, knowing Cindy, the brain behind this entire idea. We had John Carpenter with Box.org and Amy Holmes with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors and C. Joe Smith from the Alaska Conservation Foundation. And we also had 3 additional judges who are here with us today. And that is Gayle Carpenter, who's the Chief Business Development Officer at TechSoup. Thank you, Gayle, for being here. We have Deirdre Chadwick, who's the president of the BMI Foundation. Nice to see you, Deirdre. And Mike Chamberlain, who's the CEO of the Grants Professionals Association. So thank you for being here, Mike, and thank you all for all that you did to help get us here to this moment today. From those 186 applications that were submitted, we chose 8 different honorable mentions. And if you go to our website, you can learn about these organizations and these applications. And then there were 4 different sector awards. We chose 2 within the government sector and 2 within the private sector. And so you can, again, come to the GrantStation website and read the applications from these award-winning proposals for these organizations. And then finally, the reason that we're here today is for our grant prize winner, who could come from government or private. But this one written by Mary Connor with Soccer Without Borders was our grant prize winner. So, we do this entire activity so that, as grant professionals, you can come and read excellent proposals and learn from them. And we also do it just to give some recognition to that hard work that grant professionals do. If it's from the research or the writing or the wrangling or the management or anything like that. And so it's just our way of also kind of recognizing them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and ask Mary, who is our grant prize winner, a little bit about Soccer Without Borders and the particular program that she wrote for, which was the Nicaragua's Education and Leadership Program. So can you tell us a little bit about those 2 things?
Great. Thanks so much, Alice. And thanks to everybody who's here. I see people from really all over. This is an honor to get to talk to you all today and share a little bit about Soccer Without Borders and the process that we go through, the collective process we go through to put in grant proposals. So Soccer Without Borders is a nonprofit that envisions a more inclusive and equitable world through soccer. I was a soccer player and coach since I was 4, my whole life. And I have been a part of the game in so many different ways, from player to coach to ref to fan to really every possible way. But it wasn't until Soccer Without Borders that I realized how powerful soccer can be as a change-making force in the world. It's something that more than half of humanity engages with this sport in some way. And people viscerally, socially care about it. And so, Soccer Without Borders at its heart is trying to harness that to make a broader positive change in the world. But specifically, we focus on underserved youth who are excluded by reasons of their race, ethnicity, gender, financial means, kids that aren't sort of getting in the game, and by proxy then sort of left out of or not able to reach their full potential in their lives because of these barriers that exist and systemic inequalities. So we're trying to use soccer as a way to support young people to reach their full potential on and off the field. And we've been doing this for 17 years now. We're based in the United States, but our work reaches internationally. I'm excited to talk more today about our program in Nicaragua. That program is specifically focused on how we can create pathways for girls to get in the game, and the way that we combine soccer with education and community building to support girls on and off the field to achieve greater educational outcomes and really kick off their careers and lives. So this particular application was centered around our education and leadership program. So the wraparound services that complement our soccer programming on the field. And it's on the website if people want to get into. I know here we're talking a little bit more about the process of the application than the purpose of it, but I will just say that this education program has supported now more than 500 girls with scholarships and supports to advance through primary, secondary, and even university education. The combination of the concrete tutoring and academic supports that we provide, financial support for scholarships, the combination of those sort of tangible resources with the social and emotional support that a team and a mentor and sort of a culture of future focus provides, that's really where impact happens, and where you can really see a change over time in a person, but also in an entire community. So I'm excited to share more about it.
Thanks, Mary. One of the things, kind of piggybacking right off of what you just spoke about, is one of the things that really jumped out at me when I was reading your proposal was how authentically your organization is addressing those inequalities and that diversity and inclusion. And not only in like the projects and the target populations, but also you could see it systemically in your organization. And so how do you guys do that and really walk the talk, if you will, as an organization to be able then to communicate that through your proposals?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind whenever I'm asked about what I would call authentic collaboration, when you're really not working in a community or for a community or on behalf of a community, but you're actually like authentically collaborating to create a mutual shared vision, to like bring to life a shared vision of how things could be. There's this really beautiful quote from a Aboriginal Australian writer, Lila Watson, that says, "If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. If you've come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together." And that has shaped all of the ways that we do things. So we're not just saying, oh, this policy or this approach is for them. It's actually, if we're not doing it, if we're not doing what we say we do within ourselves, how can we authentically promote it in a community? So take gender equality as an example. We're in essence with this program getting girls into soccer, trying to change outcomes, educational outcomes for girls off the pitch. that's working to advance gender equality in an environment and country where girls don't have the same opportunities as boys. Soccer is a very obvious one. When we first started, there were literally 0 opportunities for girls to play sports, whereas everywhere you went, you would see boys playing. And that is not just for those who may or may not think sport is a right. This is symbolic of a larger societal challenge where girls are expected to be in their homes, taking care of siblings. Their worlds, as they grow into adolescence, get smaller, whereas their brothers' worlds get bigger. They're out able to be in the world, playing sports, playing with friends, doing what they want to do, whereas girls are at home doing chores, working in the market, taking care of siblings. So soccer was sort of symbolic of a larger difference in experience between girls and boys in this town. And if we as an organization want to address that and advocate for opportunities for girls, well, who's doing that advocating? How do we both have women in the lead who are not just foreign outsiders like me, but actually from the community advocating for that change? And how do we engage men in the community as allies in that work? So very much from the beginning, if we are going to be an organization that aims to advance gender equality with a focus on getting girls in the game through soccer, you want to have women soccer players in the lead. You want to grow women leaders from the community, and that's what we've done from day one. We said our goal was to have a local woman in the lead and have our staff be full of women who had graduated from the program, and that's what we have. More than 70% of our coaches are now alumni, many of whom I met when I first went in 2008. I met them on the pitch when they were in primary school. They're now graduated and full-time staff members of ours. We have Veronica Valladares is our director in the lead. And, we've really been able to, over time, carve out a pathway to be the change that we're talking about making, not just talking about it, but actually taking steps to become it. And that takes time. That is something I will say. I know we're not here to talk about program development, but I think from a grant writer or a grant evaluator perspective, it's really important to think about timeframes when you ask an organization to articulate the change they're trying to make, because some changes take time. Like they take a generation to see in 2008 all the girls who would become women leaders in the program in 2023. That took time to develop, and because of the system that existed, they didn't exist. There wasn't just like a bunch of women coaches available in 2008. They didn't exist. So we had to work together to build it, and really proud of what we built and really honored that was, valued in assessing this proposal for funding and then for this award. So thank you for pointing that out, because that's something that we really try to do in all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion work, is not just look about what should be in the world or in other communities, but actually within ourselves, holding ourselves to that same rigor.
Thanks, Mary. Congratulations again on your win here and your many wins with your program. I'm Deirdre Chadwick. I run the BMI Foundation, which is a very small music-focused nonprofit in New York City. I think I loved what you just said about authenticity and how your organization really has to reflect the values that you're trying to promote in the communities you're working in, and we also embrace that here. And I love when people speak about that, because I think our own authenticity in the end is what comes through in the writing, in the work, in the daily moving your work forward. I think it's driven by that.
Thank you.
I just commend you for that. Excuse me. In addition to that, through line of authenticity in your program, Your application specifically incorporated quite a bit of data, evidence-based interventions, research outcomes, and also international benchmarks like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There were obviously like a lot of moving parts there, but your narrative just the same was very clear, and you appeared to be conscious at all of those levels of the different pieces of data that you were trying to incorporate, which made your presentation sort of, I think, very concise and integrated and easy for us to follow, even though it encompassed a lot of different parts. We would just like to hear from you how you took all of those various data points and brought them together into this sort of really well integrated and sort of smooth application that was somehow managed to, you hit all your notes without a lot of needless repetition, but still referred back to the important sort of the through line again of what the project mission actually was. So we just want to hear more about the data incorporation and
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Well, and I think having the building blocks to assemble into a concise proposal really starts before you even have a proposal to write. Like, I just want to acknowledge that all of the research, all of the data points, everything that I drew on to piece this together, our theory of change maps right to the Sustainable Development Goals. We're very clear about which targets within that we as an organization map to. So my job as a proposal writer was really to pull it all together. And that is not a singular person. Bridget Black is here. She and I worked very closely on this. So just as a first step, I would say, even before you have a proposal to write, can you assemble as many of the building blocks as you need? That could be bodies of research that you can then sort of pull from that would best suit this particular proposal, having a set of outcomes that you as an organization already are measuring towards and can sort of map that this research plus this program design should lead to this outcome. And, we're thoughtful about that. Those were already pieces that were there for me to pull from. And then it's sort of a matter of laying out the actual questions of the application. This one had a lot. There was, each section didn't just have a headline question. It also had very specific kind of like 8 questions underneath each section. So it gave me a little bit of a roadmap, but the hardest part was actually keeping it under 20 pages, which feels shocking. 20 pages should be a lot. And so the first thing we did was Bridget laid it all out, like actually took what is being asked, what do we need to assemble, and laid it all out, almost like draw the outline. And then we would talk about what are we specifically going to apply for and what's sort of our case for that. So we sort of determined it's going to be the education and leadership program. That's sort of the best fit for this particular proposal. And then we sort of just started dumping in, here's some research we have, here's some past narratives that we have. And so I want to name that this draws on the work of so many other people, like particularly Bridget, but also our M&E team, the people who assembled that research before, the team that put together the theory of change. Like, there's just so many other, every coach that takes attendance, like their work goes into doing this. So you draw on all of that. And then I think where I'm fortunate, the experience I have in grant writing comes in is to synthesize that, because the risk of assembling it that way, where you sort of throw everything against the wall and drop it in, the risk is that it feels disjointed and you never sort of get that narrative through line and that arc. So for me, my process, once we sort of have it all there, is to actually sit with it, clear a day and sit with it and start to almost approach it like I did a college essay, I guess. Like, what is the main argument here? What's the through line? And I shared this with Alice, but I love to read things out loud after I write it. to make sure that I can hear myself. You can hear the argument come through. I will often also ask a second reader who maybe doesn't know the program as well to read it, to say like, hey, does this make any sense to you? If you didn't know anything about it. So I think there's a lot that an organization can do ahead of a particular proposal to be prepared for that. We have a folder of grant, kind of like common grant materials that we need for attachments. We have a grant language document that has some sort of really general boilerplate language about the organization that can be edited. So I like to start not from a blank page, and having somebody else kind of work with me to lay out the page and sort of start from something was a big part of the approach. And that allowed me to spend more time on making it readable, making it logical, making that through line, versus just trying to get something on the page, which is sometimes you run out of time, right? Like you end up with just like, oh, I answered every question. You want to have that extra layer of, not only did I answer every question, but is this a cohesive argument? And did I use every question to say something new and not just repeat something I've already said? So I hope that answers your question. That's been my process. I know we have a handout for everybody afterwards that has some of these tips synthesized a little bit better than I just said it.
Well, Mary, one of the things that I found great about your proposal was your evaluation, the evaluation portion of your application, because it not only addressed how you're doing program evaluation, but it also shared the changes you've made as you've gone along in the program, even the short-term based changes you made in the program. How did you develop your evaluation plan, and how did you choose the components to evaluate your impact and process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is often the most intimidating section for a lot of grant writers. One thing that I did sort of early in my grant writing career was try to think more about what the funder might want and what they think, what I think they want to see, and then figure out later how to deliver on that. And that was all wrong. I have since flipped totally my process on that. I start with what Soccer Without Borders measures already. Like, what is our program actually designed to do? What are we already measuring? And what of those things fit with this particular program that I'm sort of pitching here in this proposal? I think as an organization, two things that are helpful about our M&E philosophy that makes it attractive. One is that we see M&E, monitoring and evaluation, as a learning process. That is, we are a process-oriented organization. It's in our core values. So we don't just do monitoring and evaluation in order to get funding. We actually do it to make ourselves better. That shines through in our tools, in the way we train our coaches, in the way we look at data. So that was already a part of our ethos, was to have process-oriented tools and take feedback from the kids, from parents. I still remember the most extensive parent survey we did in Nicaragua led to the creation of this scholarship program, because we didn't understand in the early years of this program why there would be, it's a free program, why would there be barriers for the girls to be able to come and participate? And one of the barriers was, when you need extra equipment. Okay, so we're providing the equipment. Why still can't you come? Okay, well, the girls are then not able to spend as much time in the market making money for their family. They're creating extra laundry for their family, which costs money, and water bills and soap and all of these. There's this whole knock-on effect of the girl being allowed to do something different. And so once we heard that from parents, it was like, well, what if there was a tangible sort of economic benefit through these school scholarships to your family? Like, would that then sort of be the tipping point that you could allow the girls to come? So I just, if you're a part of an organization that is struggling with this section on a grant proposal, I would say look at your M&E approach and say, like, how are we using our M&E to make ourselves better? That's part one that helped me. I think the second part is that we believe in right-sized M&E. I think too often smaller organizations or younger programs think they have to like do a randomized control study or something that is so far past what is reasonable for the time frame or for the sort of stage of your organization. I have found that, and I think you all validated this for me, that when we put forward, we have a thoughtful design of our program, we rigorously monitor that we're implementing it the way we say we do, and we are constantly getting better and taking feedback, that's enough. And I can trace that what we're trying to do will contribute. We're seeing strong short-term outcomes. We're seeing strong middle-term outcomes. It is too early for us to say we've changed an entire generation of girls in Nicaragua. Like, our reach isn't big enough and we haven't been there long enough. So being honest and just a relentless advocate for the impact you are making, the outcomes that you can state and defend, be proud of those. And I think that's maybe what stood out to you with this is, the research-based design, the process-oriented, willingness to get better and continuously learn, and then the intention of, and we believe that by doing this, we are actually meaningfully contributing to a better future for these girls and for the world. We're contributing towards, these sort of global goals that are outside of our control, whether they actually happen on a global scale for sure. So yeah, I think be honest and thoughtful about where you are, at what's reasonable M&E, and be proud of it and sell it. And don't pretend to be something you're not, and don't undersell what you are doing. That would be my best advice in that section. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and absolutely, and you can tell it's very organic to your organization, and that really did come through in the proposal.
Thank you. I see the question here. M&E is just monitoring and evaluation. So we're talking about that evaluation section, and how we kind of monitor our progress towards goals. That's as simple as like taking attendance, who's in our program, knowing the demographics of who's registered, knowing what they're attending, how often, what benefits are we providing, and how the girls are advancing in school over time. Why we're losing them is also something we measure. We have exit monitoring and evaluation that we do. If a girl drops out of the program, we find out why, so we can track exits and make ourselves better based on negative feedback as well.
That seems like a good time for me to jump in. Hey, Mary, thank you again for giving us a chance to review your great application. From my work I do at TechSoup, I've been there a while. We are always, centered on how nonprofits remain, not just what do you do with a grant, but how do you keep yourself going day after day, the sustainability of the organization. So I had a couple of questions for you that I would love to know more about. One, first of all, was this the first time you had applied for this grant or to this grantor?
Or did they know not. You? We were rejected, I think 4 years prior.
Okay.
We had applied, not for the exact same program, but we had applied. Yeah.
Okay, because that's something that we find is that oftentimes you need to build that relationship, build that awareness, and I love the fact that you weren't afraid to educate the reviewer. You did not assume that they knew your mission and your heart as well as you did, and so I found that kind of refreshing. Not everybody takes that approach to it. But, I guess one of the bigger things, especially as we're all dealing still on Zoom in a post-COVID universe, or hopefully post-COVID universe, as you look at this grant and other activities for your organization, how are you feeling about the nature of nonprofit NGOs in your own organization? And, if you're going to be talking to this lovely group of people here, what are some of the things that you think are the highest priorities to keep you sustainable? Because obviously, if you're not sustainable, that mission doesn't happen. So, I'd love to know your thoughts about it.
Well, especially in youth development, I think you, in a lot of ways, have to make a long-term commitment, because you don't want to be somebody that's kind of coming in and out of kids' lives, especially kids in vulnerable situations. So I really appreciate that emphasis on sustainability. If evaluation is sometimes the hardest question people have, I think sustainability is sometimes the most confusing question to people, because by nature, many nonprofit programs are operating against market forces, right? Like, this is something that the public sector and private sector are not paying for. There's not profit to be made. That's why we exist, is to fill that gap. So already you're sort of working against the forces in place to fill this gap. So one of the ways, I guess, the ways that I think about sustainability is not just purely in terms of, can we get to fully generating our own revenue so we're not reliant on philanthropy? I think that's like the most maybe simple definition of sustainability. Whereas I've found that sustainability, the ability to consistently meet the need, if the need exists, meet the demand, relies on, one, people. Like, can you show continuity and resiliency through transition? That's of people, of economic conditions, of major changes. We were able, because we are responsive and community embedded, we were able to adapt to challenges from COVID immediately. We were one of the first organizations to change our model, get in touch with families, let them know what was happening, what was possible. We became a resource for families versus shutting down and needing to focus on ourselves. And so having community embeddedness, having a really close, responsive relationship with your constituent, with the clients or whoever you're serving, is, I think, key to sustainability, because it provides for resiliency. A second area of sustainability comes from your pipelines for people. I think we were this, and this is the case with many really valuable community organizations, that they're too reliant on a single person to sort of know it all and do it all and have all the relationships. So being thoughtful about how your infrastructure can stand on its own, and what pipelines you have, and whether two people could do any one of the tasks that need to be done. Like, is there a second person that knows those things? So in Nicaragua, we've had this pipeline where girls that are captains on the team when they're in high school become assistant coaches, become head coaches, become staff members. So they know what's going on from the day they're 12. So there's a lot of sort of teamwork in that. And then the last thing I would say is you can't talk about sustainability without talking about funding. And for us, diverse funding streams has been a way to sort of mitigate against ups and downs of economic forces, where we're not overly reliant on one single source of income. This grant was actually a response to an income stream that we lost. We had previously had foundation funding was about 40%. We were able to generate 35% of our revenue through these cultural exchange trips that we would do with college soccer players going down. We actually hosted entire college soccer teams in Nicaragua. When Nicaragua went into a state of socio-political crisis and the embassy it went on the do not travel list, we couldn't do that anymore. We lost that whole revenue stream. And so we were able to make the case that this was a temporary gap, and this particular funder stepped up and filled it for us in that time. So I think making sure that nothing is more than 50% of your revenue, no one thing, especially something that could be subject to forces out of your control, is really important for sustainability. And I'll just close with, you asked if I'm optimistic or pessimistic. it's really hard in this moment, in this particular moment, to feel optimistic about how society is taking care of vulnerable communities. And what makes me optimistic is I just see every day there's a whole generation of leaders who have come through our program and outside of our program that they're ready to change. They're ready to be the change they want to see. And that's what keeps me optimistic, because it's challenging as a nonprofit leader to keep up right now with all the kind of volatility of what's happening. I know we're going to get to potential changes in philanthropy. I would love to talk about that and hear everybody's ideas of how philanthropy can do its part to contribute to more positive outcomes in the future.
Thank you, Mary. I'm just loving listening to, the things that I've worked with nonprofits for 20 years, and I've worked in nonprofits, but I do a lot of training. And so to see, kind of how you guys are actually doing all these best practices, it really is just heartwarming to hear your story and how you're actually doing these things on the ground, because they're not easy, and you've worked your way through this, and it's really just amazing to see. So we have kind of one final kind of structural question, and then we'll see if the audience has any questions. So go ahead and put those in your question and answer box. But the last one is more kind of a technical question about budgets and writing your grants, because I know a lot of times when you're working with people who are grant reviewers, or I'm working with these judges and such, a lot of people go to your budget first, and they read your budget first, and then they go to your application and they start to match those things up. And again, as with every other part of your application, you did that in a really seamless way where you could completely almost see your project through your budget. So can you share with the participants here how you kind of organize that component?
Yeah, this is something I've also learned early on. I dreaded doing the budget, and so I would do it last. Now I do it first. Maybe not in full detail, but like it's a part of the outlining process to say, what are we applying for? How much are we applying for? And what are the key components that this is actually going to pay for? Because oftentimes one grant won't be the whole of your project budget. So you have to kind of outline what is the project that we're talking about, and then how much of this grant, what will this particular funding go towards within that project? Is it the whole of the project? Will the project not happen if we don't get the grant, or is it about expanding the project? So if you don't have those answers to start, you're not ready to write yet. You might be ready to sort of assemble, but if you don't know yet what exactly you're asking for from this funder, yeah, you shouldn't be writing, because it'll come out in your narrative that you don't know what exactly you're asking them to partner around. So I would really encourage people to, right from the start, how much are we applying for? Is that consistent with what they say they'll give? Some funders are really clear. They say you can only apply for this amount. That makes it easy. Sometimes it's open-ended. You don't know. So do the research, find out what they've given in the past to comparable organizations, see if your size aligns with what's feasible for them to fund. If they're not going to fund $100,000, if they give only $10,000 grants all the time, like right size again what you're asking for, have there be some research and thought behind that, and then at least draft an outline first of what this funding will pay for. I have also learned to not go overly detailed if you don't have to. Like, if your budget, let's say your budget for a project is $50,000 and they're going to give you 20. Sometimes one approach would be to say, okay, that's 40% of the overall project budget, so I'll 40% every line item, write down the budget. That's sometimes more complicated for yourself and for them to understand, then you're trying to explain every single line item. So can you see what they will fund, what they won't? What do you need realistically to achieve what you're saying will be achieved? And then can you use the budget actually to help tell your story? So I'll throw in things like if it's supporting a coach, I won't just say this supports a coach. I'll say this supports a coach who is a former alumni of the program and is from the community we serve. And if I can, I'll name her. I think it's just another chance to not dehumanize or sort of act like you just have a handout. You have your hands out trying to get money. It's like, this is a part of inviting this funder to be a part of the narrative and be a part of what we're trying to create together. And this is their way of contributing towards that. So if you have the opportunity, sometimes that's not the structure of it. Like sometimes you just have to fill out their Excel sheet and there's no space for notes. But if you have the opportunity to use the budget to tell your story further, do it. I would say the other piece I would say about budgets, I try not to shy away from the question I think they'll ask. If we have one thing that's common is people don't like to pay for salaries, but for us, like teachers to a classroom, there's no teams without coaches. Like you need, that's the program. And so I'll say that, like, these are not just personnel costs. This is the people delivering the program. If you're asked for like prior year financials and there's a deficit or a surplus or something, name it. Say, this is what happened last year and this is why we're applying. I just would rather, or I guess my approach has been to try to predict what questions I would ask if I was them and then try to find a way to answer them. So it doesn't eliminate you from contention before you even start. And I really appreciate you calling out that many funders will look at the budget first, because it's usually the quickest summary of what you're asking for. So if we know that, we should be also paying attention to it pretty early on in our process instead of at the end. And I empathize because I know for many years I did it last, because I was, using the narrative to sort of help me figure out what I was saying and then putting it, getting the numbers together in the end. And I now totally have reversed that. And I think it's a much more effective way.
That's excellent. And just so you all know as well, Mary and I had talked beforehand about some of her process and stuff. And so we will be sending out a little kind of sheet of kind of tips from the field, should have been from the pitch, but about how to, how she goes about her process and how, to kind of help you out as well. So you have some real tangible takeaways from what we talked about today. So I might see, David, if we have any questions from the audience.
Yeah, there are a couple that, one probably for Mary and one probably for you, Alice. So Mary, Patricia asked, how was monitoring evaluation methods designed to meet the cultural differences of the groups? And what were some examples of what you were monitoring?
One very big cultural difference is it's all in Spanish in Nicaragua. And so if one of the tools we use is a youth survey, and that youth survey is mapped to the socio-emotional learning characteristics that we're trying to measure for personal development. Those are sort of research-based youth development. If kids develop these skills, this will support them in whatever their personal goals are. But sometimes things like responsible decision-making doesn't exactly translate word for word in Spanish and also at different levels. We have kids that are 6 years old to 18 years old. So how you approach that needs to be age specific, culture specific, language specific. So we do a lot of adaptations of all of our tools, and we make sure that each location where we are implementing our monitoring evaluation practices has what we call an M&E captain, who is a local staff member whose job it is to help us adapt every tool to be context specific. So there is not a tool I can think of in Soccer Without Borders that is like created in the United States solely and then just like forced that somebody in Nicaragua or Uganda or Oakland would have to implement it 100% without any adaptation or like context specific way that they're going to implement this with the kids. So I don't know if I'd call it as much as like an 80-20 rule. I don't think it's 20%, but there is some flexibility around, how do you collect the data? What tools are being used? What language is being used? Who's delivering it? Who's asking for the data? How you bring parents into that process. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think it does. And there are quite a few questions related to actually reviewing your proposal. So I'm going to make sure everyone has a link to that. A question that might be better for you, Alice, is could you just explain the difference between indirect costs and direct costs as far as budgeting is concerned? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
I usually don't get caught on mute on these things. I was saying how much time do we have, but it really is also kind of a funder specific thing as well. And so usually, a funder will either say they will provide funding for indirect costs, which are those things that fund your overall organization, but not one specific project or program. So that could be fundraising, that could be some of your management costs, those kinds of things that help support your organization, but not necessarily help fund this one program in Nicaragua. But if a funder allows an indirect cost or not, that's again very funder specific. So you would want to work with them to decide. And then just a little pitch for at GrantStation, we do offer some workshops on how to create those budgets, what those things are, and specifically, and things like that.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Alice. There's one other question in there, but I'll be able to answer that one directly. Did you have other questions you wanted to ask the judges, Alice?
I do. I think if we've gotten through all the audience questions, I think I would just like to wrap up what you're kind of wishing for in the field of philanthropy or grant seeking and grant writing, or what changes or growth are you seeing that we're kind of on the cusp of? Just where do you think some of the next steps are? So I think I'll just go ahead. Deirdre, you're right below me. I will go ahead and start with you.
Thanks, Alice. So I think there's there's the grant making and the grant seeking. So we're more of a funder, so I'm going to start with the grant making side. One thing that we strive to do is to really create the simplest possible application and alleviate the reporting burden on our grantees. I think that funders who want like extensive reporting on how money was spent after they've already received an extensive report on how the money will be spent just seems onerous. And I think we, as funders, we need to really recognize that these organizations are running on just no margins at all. And everything we ask of them requires resources that were not in the budget that they gave us. So as funding organizations, I think it's really incumbent on us to figure out how to lessen the burdens that come with the grant and think about how can we get the information we think we need from the budget that we already received, or when they apply next year, we can look at the budget and compare, and we can do some of that work. So that's something that I hope it's a change I hope to see more of. And I think on the writing side, I mean, I just have to come back again to like the thread through all of this was like, Mary's organization has an authenticity to its every action and every decision. And I think our personal authenticity matters. And when you're writing the grant, I mean, so I didn't read the whole chat because there was too much, but someone asked, should we be writing in the third person, or is a first person, like more casual but more authentic approach acceptable, or is that the new? And I'm 100% on the side of personal authenticity, and I think the more you can convey just your beliefs and your passions and what motivates you, and through what you're saying, I don't mean like writing a purple paragraph about your passions, but I think in a carefully written application, those that authenticity comes through the way it did in Mary's application. And so I think we can't be afraid to be who we are when we're asking for money or asking for support. So that personal authenticity is maybe the most important thing to me. Wait, I'm going to shut up. Let someone else talk. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. No, I really enjoy hearing that from the grant maker side too, right? Because I think, and even with COVID and a lot of the changes, there has been a shift in kind of some of that capacity money, or understanding those indirect costs a little bit more, and how organizations are, really, again, without the margin. And so I love to hear what you guys are doing there, and that this maybe is part of a bigger shift. So that's wonderful. Gayle, I'll turn it over to you with the same question.
Okay, my apologies. So, you're looking at the casual voice versus the more formal, structured voice, or what is
more of kind of
gone over a number of them. So
sorry, how about where you kind of see what's the next thing in grant making and grant writing? What do you wish to see in this kind of field?
I think, going back to what Mary has done in terms of making her day-to-day activities a vivid project, makes it easier for a funder to feel like they're not going to be contributing a tiny bit. They're actually achieving some goal, which all grantors, and Deirdre, you would know better than I would, but you have a vision of what you want to achieve out in the world. And that's why in TechSoup's side of the house, we often look at sustainability and can you be functional? And infrastructure is rarely a priority for funding. So you have to go looking for things that are, bringing that together. But, going back to the story narrative, I think you can never go wrong with, again, I agree with you. You don't need purple prose for this, but there should be a passion behind why you are running the organization, what you see, what change happens in the world, and how this funding will make that incrementally possible. And I love the fact that Mary did not promise the universe. She made clear, cogent human impact, clear. And so for me, that was, my recommendation is that facts are fine. Storytelling is what we do as a species. And the more story, the more vivid, the more you can get somebody to put themselves in your spirit, is a really good way to communicate. So that's my 2 cents.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gayle. And so, Mike, we will let you, we're going to let Mary bring us home, but we're going to have you next with where you think, and I'm sure you have lots of thoughts on what maybe is some of our next steps, or where we're going, or what you wish for.
I do. I've got lots of ideas there, but I'm going to limit myself to 3. And so the first one is that the recognition that for grant professionals, it's more than writing. And we've heard that today in what we talked about with the monitoring and evaluation, the importance of data, putting a budget together. So really, in a presentation I was at this morning, somebody brought this up again. Yes, grant professionals do a lot of writing. It's writing to tell that story, as Gayle was talking about. And that's an important element, but it's so much more than that. And it's weaving that story together with the data, with the evaluation. So there's a lot more to the work of a grant professional. And kind of my hope for the future is not only will grant makers recognize that, but will the grant professionals themselves recognize that and say, it's not, I'm just the grant person in my organization. No, you're a grant professional. You're doing so much more to assist the organization moving forward. The second one then is just the growth of unrestricted funding. That's kind of one of my wishes for the future. Gayle mentioned it, that it's hard to find funding for those infrastructure items and the support for the organization. And I think that's one of those pieces that we've seen that happen more over the last 3 to 5 years. But I hope that that will continue to grow from the philanthropy sector, so that we recognize that there are needs in the organization that are beyond the programmatic specific needs, that are the things that are going to support, whether it's a language translation or whether it's a tool within Zoom to help do something for the organization. So that ability of that unrestricted funding. And the last thing, and this is kind of hits on something Deirdre said, the recognition by grantors of matching up the reporting with the funding. I was just talking to somebody the other day who said, they used to have, they had a $5,000 grant that required like 10 pages of reporting. And they said nobody was applying for it because they said, I'm not going to mess with doing that reporting. So the grant makers recognizing and making that evaluation and saying, yes, we have to be reasonable in how we're doing things going forward in that regard. So those are my 3 wishes for the future.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mike. And so, Mary, why don't you go ahead and bring us home on some of your thoughts about the future and what you wish to
I want
see?
to echo that, right size the expectations. I wonder often, if you were like a single shareholder in a huge company, would you expect to get the same level of reporting as if you were a majority shareholder? Like there's not always right sized, if you're giving a small grant on a big program or a large grant on a small program. So I want to +1 that and the unrestricted funding. But I would say strength-based and trust-based are 2 things I would love to see. Strength-based meaning that when we do tell a story and a narrative, I spoke in this grant about the conditions of Nicaragua, but I hope you all notice that when we talk about the people that we are serving, it's from a place of strength. They are the women of Soccer Without Borders Nicaragua are the heroes of the story. They are the most resilient, incredible people. And so this is not look at this poor community, like it's not a deficit-based approach, it's a strength-based approach. And I hope that funders on the other side value that when reading, that it's not like a who's worst off Olympics. It's really valuing a strength-based approach and trust-based approach, meaning long-term, especially if you're willing to give multi-year or unrestricted or renewable funding, don't make the same organization repeat itself as if you don't know they exist. Like we have renewed funding where I'm applying to the same funder year over year, and you would think they'd never met us. Like I have to fill out all the same stuff. What's your mission statement? Who are you? What? And that can get really exhausting and tedious to feel like you have to prove year over year when you're just trying to, continuously provide a really important service. So trust-based, strength-based, and right-sized would be my 3 wishes.
My
Thanks.
goodness. This is absolutely amazing. And I do have to say, really, I never re-listened to these things. There are a few things on here I'm coming back to re-listen to when it's done. So everybody, thank you to our judges for all your time and effort. Mary, thank you so much for all the work you do at your organization and providing us with all these great tips. We are going to be sending you a copy of this presentation that you can listen to again and share with others. And then, like I said, Mary and I also just kind of wrote up a little takeaway sheet of things that the way she does her work and things that you can learn from. So we'll be sending that out with the recording as well.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com, your fast track to funding and online education.